The small town of Glenwood was alive with excitement. Every year, the Glenwood Talent Festival was the most awaited event. Families, friends, and visitors from nearby towns gathered in the community hall to watch singers, dancers, magicians, and all kinds of performers show what they could do. It was not just a show, it was a moment where anyone could shine. Backstage, there was a girl named Amara. She was 16 years old, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She had not come to the festival to perform. She was there to cheer for her best friend Lila, who had been practicing a dance routine for weeks. Amara had always loved music, but she was shy about her voice. She only sang when she was alone in her room, never in front of a crowd. While Lila prepared for her turn, Amara stood in a quiet corner. The other contestants were talking loudly, showing off their talents before going on stage. Some were stretching, others tuning their guitars, and a few were trying to calm their nerves. Amara quietly watched, feeling happy that she was just there as an audience member. But her peace did not last long. A group of 3 contestants noticed her. They were older, maybe 18 or 19, and they seemed to be in high spirits. One of them, a tall boy named Kevin, walked over with a grin. "Hey, you should go on stage," he said. Amara shook her head quickly. "Oh no, I'm not a performer." The others joined in. "Come on, it will be fun," said a girl with bright red hair. "You've been standing there all quiet. Let's see what you can do." Amara smiled politely, but she could sense the tone in their voices. It was not a real invitation. It was more like a dare, the kind meant to make someone uncomfortable. She did not want to cause trouble, so she just shook her head again. Kevin laughed. "What's wrong? Afraid you might surprise yourself?" His words were light, but his smile was teasing. The others chuckled. Before she could answer, the stage coordinator came by with a clipboard. "We have a small gap before the next act. Anyone want to fill in?" Kevin turned to the coordinator. "She can," he said, pointing at Amara. The coordinator looked at her. "Do you sing or play something?" Amara's heart raced. Everyone nearby was looking at her now. She wanted to say no and step back, but the expectation in the air was heavy. The other contestants were watching with curious eyes, and a few of them were clearly amused. It felt like a trap, but at the same time, something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, she should try. Her mouth felt dry. I can sing," she said softly. The coordinator nodded. "All right then. You're up after this act." As the coordinator walked away, Kevin gave a playful clap. "This will be interesting," he said, and his friends grinned. Amara felt her knees weaken. She had not prepared anything. Her mind was spinning. She had never performed in front of so many people. What if she forgot the words? What if her voice cracked? The thought made her stomach twist. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she saw herself as a little girl, sitting by the window on rainy afternoons, singing softly to herself. She remembered how singing always made her feel free, how it carried her away from her worries. Maybe she could hold on to that feeling now. The act before her finished, and the audience clapped loudly. The stage lights shifted. The coordinator called her name. Amara stepped forward slowly, her heart pounding in her ears. The hall seemed bigger than she remembered. The bright lights made it hard to see the faces in the crowd, but she could feel their eyes on her. A low murmur ran through the audience as they realized this was someone they had never seen perform before. She reached the microphone stand. Her hands felt cold, and she could hear whispers from somewhere in the crowd. Some people seemed curious, others skeptical. The judges sat at a long table in front of the stage, flipping through papers and adjusting their pens. "Whenever you're ready," one judge said kindly. Amara nodded. She adjusted the microphone slightly. For a brief moment, she almost turned and walked away. But then she thought of something her grandmother used to tell her. Sometimes the moment chooses you. Don't run from it. She took a slow breath and prepared to sing. Backstage, Kevin and his friends were watching with half smiles, expecting something ordinary, maybe even a little awkward, but they had no idea what was about to happen. The stage felt like a wide ocean, and Amara was standing in the middle of it with no boat. She could hear the faint hum of the microphone and the soft rustle of the audience as people shifted in their seats. Somewhere in the middle rows, a small child giggled, and a few whispers passed from one person to another. Her eyes caught a movement near the front. Kevin and his friends had found seats close to the stage. They leaned toward each other, saying something she could not hear, but their expressions told enough. They were not expecting her to impress anyone. Amara's heart was pounding hard, so much that she could almost feel it in her throat. She rapped, both hands around the microphone stand to steady herself. The bright stage lights warmed her face, but her hands felt cold and stiff. The judges sat with neutral expressions. One of them, a man with gray hair and glasses, was flipping through his notes. Another, a woman with short hair, leaned back in her chair, waiting. The third judge, a young man in a neat suit, was quietly tapping his pen on the table. Amara looked down at the stage floor for a moment. She remembered how many times in life people had underestimated her. In school, she had been the quiet girl no one noticed. When she raised her hand to answer questions, some classmates had smirked, thinking she could not possibly know the answer. When group activities happened, she was often given the smallest task, as if she could not handle anything important. Those memories were like small stones in her chest, making it hard to breathe. And now, standing here, the same feeling was coming back. This was another moment where people expected little from her. The sound technician gave a small signal that the microphone was ready. Amara's thoughts rushed. What if her voice trembled? What if she forgot the words halfway through? What if they all laughed? She closed her eyes for a brief second and heard her grandmother's voice in her memory. You have a song inside. You, Amara. Don't hide it. The world needs to hear it, even if it's only once. She opened her eyes slowly. The music was about to begin, and she had chosen a song she knew by heart. It was not a popular, loud song. It was a soft, emotional one that her grandmother used to hum while cooking dinner. She had never performed it before, but it carried the warmth of her home, the sound of rain on the roof, and the smell of fresh bread from the oven. The first gentle notes of the piano began. The hall grew quieter. People leaned forward, curious, to hear what would come from the stage. Amara took a deep breath. Her first instinct was to start softly, but then she remembered all the times she had been silent when she wanted to speak. This was not the time to hide. She straightened her back, loosened her grip on the microphone, and let her voice rise just enough to fill the room. The first few words came out steady, but she could feel her throat tighten from nervousness. She pushed past it. Her voice found its balance, and she let the melody guide her. The audience's whispers faded into stillness. The judges stopped writing. The man with glasses slowly looked up, his pen resting on the table. The woman with short hair leaned forward now, elbows on the desk. The young man in the suit stopped tapping his pen entirely. Kevin and his friends stopped talking. One of them shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Kevin kept his eyes fixed on the stage. The teasing smiles they wore earlier had slipped away, replaced with something else, something closer to surprise. Amara sang through the first verse, her voice soft yet strong, like a stream of water that knows its path. Her confidence grew. With each line, she could feel the music carrying her, wrapping her in a calm warmth that drowned out her fear. She reached the chorus, and her voice lifted higher, fuller. It was not just sound, it was emotion. Every note carried a piece of her story, the quiet afternoons when she dreamed of singing, the lonely moments when she felt invisible, the times she wished someone would simply listen. In that moment, she was no longer the shy girl in the corner of the backstage room. She was someone who belonged here, under the lights, with all eyes on her for the right reasons. By the time she finished the second verse, she could sense the shift in the room. People were no longer just watching. They were feeling the song. A woman in the front row had her hand over her chest. An older man in the back was nodding slowly, as if the tune reminded him of something from his own past. Amara felt her voice grow even stronger. The trembling was gone. The fear had melted away. All that remained was a steady, clear sound that seemed to hang in the air, reaching every corner of the hall. She closed her eyes for the last few lines, letting herself forget the crowd. She sang as if she were back in her bedroom with only the wind outside her window to hear her. When she opened her eyes again, she saw something she had never expected: complete stillness. No one was whispering. No one was shifting in their seats. Even Kevin and his friends were silent, staring at her with expressions that had lost all trace of mockery. The last notes of the music faded into the air. The pianist lowered his hands from the keys, and for a heartbeat, the hall was wrapped in silence. Amara held the microphone gently, her heart slowing from its wild race. She did not know yet if the silence meant they loved it, or if they were just surprised. But she knew one thing for certain: she had given them her truth. The silence in the hall was so deep Amara could almost hear the sound of her own breath. The stage lights shone warmly on her face, and somewhere in the darkness beyond them, hundreds of eyes were fixed on her. She felt the weight of that attention, pressing down, but instead of making her shrink, it made her stand a little taller. The pianist gave a small nod to let her know the music was ready to start. The first soft chords drifted into the air, and Amara's heart found a slower, steadier beat. She gripped the microphone gently, almost like she was holding the hand of someone she trusted. She closed her eyes for just a second. In that moment, she was not standing on a stage. She was sitting on her bed by the window, the smell of rain in the air, her grandmother's soft hum filling the room. She remembered the warmth of those evenings, when singing was just for joy and not for proving anything. Then she opened her eyes, took a calm breath, and sang her first note. It was clear and pure, like a drop of water falling into still water, sending ripples across the room. That single note seemed to stretch in the air, settling into every corner of the hall. People who had been leaning back in their seats straightened unconsciously. The judges froze in place. Even Kevin, sitting in the front row with his friends, blinked in surprise. The note carried something unexpected: depth. It was not just about the sound, it was the way it made people feel. There was a quiet strength in it, a steadiness that made listeners instinctively lean closer. Amara moved into the first line of the song, her voice flowing gently but with purpose. Each word seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, as if she had been holding them for years, waiting for this exact moment. The sound wrapped around the audience, soft yet unshakable, like the warmth of a blanket on a cold night. The woman in the second row lowered her phone, forgetting to record. A teenage boy near the back stopped whispering to his friend. Even the stage crew paused, watching from behind the curtain. The first verse unfolded like a slow sunrise, each note lifting a little higher, bringing more light into the room. Amara's voice didn't shout or demand attention. It invited it, gently but firmly, like a story you couldn't walk away from once it began. By the time she reached the chorus, something had shifted in the air. Her voice rose with the melody, carrying emotion that was too big to be hidden. It was the kind of sound that made you feel something before you even understood why. The judges exchanged glances now, but not the quick, amused ones from before. This was different. The man with glasses leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his pen forgotten. The woman with short hair tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing, not in doubt, but in deep focus. The young man in the suit smiled faintly, almost as if he had just witnessed the start of something rare. And Amara? She was no longer thinking about the whispers, the teasing, or the reason she had been called to the stage. She was not singing to prove anyone wrong. She was singing because this was who she was. Her voice felt like it belonged here, under these lights, in this moment. The second verse came with more confidence. She began to add small rises and falls to her tone. Tiny, changes that made the song feel alive. Her eyes were open now, and though the bright lights made it hard to see clearly, she could sense the stillness of the crowd. Every line seemed to carry a piece of her story. The days when she had been quiet in the background, the nights she had, sung softly into her pillow so no one would hear, the countless times she had wished she could share this part of herself but didn't dare. The chorus returned, fuller and richer than before. Her voice lifted and fell like a wave, and the audience followed without even realizing it, some leaning forward, some holding their breath, others with their hands clasped as if the music had taken them somewhere far away. Kevin, who had been sitting with his arms crossed earlier, now sat with his hands resting on his knees. His expression was unreadable, but he didn't look away from the stage. The teasing energy from before was gone. As Amara moved into the bridge of the song, her voice softened again, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. The room leaned in closer, caught in the gentle pull. Then, slowly, she let her voice climb. Again, each note stronger than the last, until it reached a high, lingering tone that seemed to hang in the air forever. It was the kind of note that could break silence wide open, and when it faded, the room was still completely quiet. No coughs, no shifting seats, no murmurs, just a shared, hushed pause, as if everyone was afraid to move and break the moment. Amara sang the final lines with the same honesty she had carried from the start. There was no rush, no trying to impress, only the truth of the song and her own heart woven into it. The last note left her lips and drifted into the air like the final leaf falling from a tree. The pianist's hands stilled on the keys, letting the sound fade naturally. And then, nothing. For a few long seconds, the silence held. Amara stood there, her hands resting lightly on the microphone, her breathing slow and steady now. She didn't know if this quiet meant she had failed or if it was something else entirely. But she could feel it. That stillness wasn't emptiness. It was the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone. For a moment after the last note of the bridge faded, the hall stayed frozen in stillness. It felt as though time itself had taken a pause. Amara stood beneath the warm circle of stage light, her breath rising and falling quietly, waiting for the next sound to come from somewhere, anywhere. Then, almost like the first drop of rain before a summer storm, something shifted. The silence was no longer heavy with uncertainty. It was full, as if the audience was holding its breath in awe. Amara began the final chorus. Her voice was steady, but there was something new in it now, something deeper. She wasn't just following the melody anymore. She was telling a story with every word. The rise and fall of her tone painted pictures in the minds of those listening. A child sitting by the window, a dream that had been hidden for too long, the courage to finally step forward. The audience's eyes followed her every movement. A mother in the middle row clutched her daughter's hand, her own eyes glistening. An elderly man in the back leaned on his cane, nodding slowly to the rhythm. Even the stage crew, who had seen countless performances, stood in the wings with quiet faces, watching as if they didn't want to miss a single second. As she sang, Amara could feel the energy in the room changing. It was no longer just her on stage and them in their seats. It felt like they were all inside the same moment, connected by the music. Her voice grew richer as she moved through the second half of the chorus, the notes flowing effortlessly now. The earlier nerves were gone. She wasn't thinking about whether people liked her voice or whether she was making a mistake. She was simply living inside the song. For the first time, she dared to lift her gaze beyond the bright lights. She couldn't see every face clearly, but she could feel their focus. Not a single whisper broke the air. Not a single laugh, not a shuffle of feet. Only the quiet pull of attention, as though the whole hall had been wrapped in the same invisible thread. The bridge returned, softer this time, and her voice slipped into it like a gentle tide. The melody floated across the room, touching everyone it reached. It was delicate, but it carried strength in its softness. Somewhere in the front, Kevin's friend leaned toward him and whispered something, but Kevin didn't answer. His eyes stayed, fixed on the stage, his jaw resting in his hand. There was no trace of the earlier teasing smile. He seemed almost thoughtful. The last stretch of the song arrived, and Amara gave it everything she had, not through volume, but through feeling. Every word was shaped with care, every note polished with emotion. The sound wasn't just reaching their ears. It was sinking into them, like light into still water. In that moment, Amara remembered why she had always loved to sing. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about giving a part of herself away and watching it land softly in the hearts of others. The final note came, long and clear. She held it, letting it ring through the air until it felt like it had reached every corner of the hall. Then, she let it go, her voice fading into silence. She lowered the microphone slightly, her hands light against the stand. She didn't move. The room was so still, she could almost hear the sound of someone's sleeve brushing against their chair. 1 second passed, 2, 3. Then a single pair of hands began to clap from the back. The sound was sharp and certain, breaking the quiet like sunlight breaking through clouds. Another joined in, then another, and suddenly, it wasn't a few people, it was the entire hall. Applause swelled around her, rising and filling the space, until it was almost overwhelming. People stood to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some were smiling widely, others wiping at their eyes. Amara blinked, her own chest feeling warm in a way she couldn't quite describe. Just minutes ago, she had been a girl pushed on stage as a joke. Now, the same people who had expected nothing were standing for her. The judges were applauding too. The man with glasses was smiling openly, nodding as he clapped. The woman with short hair had set her pen aside completely, her hands together in a firm, appreciative clap. The young man in the suit leaned back with a grin, looking like someone who had just been proven delightfully wrong. Amara's heart beat quickly, but not from fear anymore. It was from joy, from the rush of realizing she had reached them. She hadn't just sung notes. She had shared something real, and they had felt it. She gave a small, almost shy smile to the crowd and stepped back slightly from the microphone. She didn't wave or bow dramatically. She simply stood there for a moment, letting the applause wash over her. The coordinator stepped onto the stage, gesturing toward her with pride, as if she had been a planned highlight of the show all along. Backstage, someone whispered, "Who is she?" Another voice replied softly, "Whoever she is, she's amazing." Amara turned to walk off the stage, but as she glanced toward the front row, her eyes met Kevin's for a brief second. He didn't look away. There was no smirk, no joke in his eyes, only a quiet nod of respect. And in that moment, Amara realized something important. She hadn't needed to prove herself to him or to anyone else. She had only needed to prove to herself that she could step into the light and stay there. She walked toward the wings of the stage, her steps lighter now. The applause was still ringing in her ears, but even when it faded, she knew this night would stay with her. Not because of the clapping, but because she had found her voice and let the world hear it, and the world had listened. The sound of the applause wrapped around Amara like a warm blanket. She stood still for a moment, letting it sink in. She could hardly believe this was the same crowd that had been whispering and smirking just minutes before. The same people, who had been unsure of her, now clapped until their palms turned red. She glanced at the rows of faces before her. Some people were smiling, some had tears in their eyes, and others just stared as if they were still trying to process what had happened. Amara felt a small, shy smile curve on her lips. This wasn't just about them liking her voice. It was about them feeling something they hadn't expected to feel. The applause didn't fade quickly. It seemed to grow stronger as more people stood up, turning it into a standing ovation. A wave of sound rolled over her, and her chest tightened, not with nerves but with gratitude. She had stepped on stage ready for this to be a mistake. Instead, it had become something unforgettable. When the clapping finally began to soften, one of the judges, an older man with kind eyes behind his glasses, raised his hand gently. The audience, still buzzing with excitement, slowly quieted, down until the hall was silent again. He leaned slightly toward his microphone and spoke. "Young lady," he began, his voice carrying across the room, "I've been judging talent shows for more than 20 years. I have heard hundreds of singers, and yet I can honestly say your voice is something rare. It's not just skill, it's heart. Every note you sang tonight came from a place that cannot be taught. That's a gift." The audience murmured softly in agreement. The second judge, a woman with short hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "When you first walked out," she admitted, "I didn't know what to expect. You seemed nervous, but then you started singing, and it was like the room changed. I stopped writing notes because I didn't want to miss a second. Your song pulled me in, and I felt like you were telling my story somehow. That's the power of a real performer." Her words made Amara's heart swell. She had never imagined that someone like her could touch others so deeply. The third judge, the young man in the neat suit, smiled warmly. "I'll be honest," he said. "When you came on stage, I thought maybe this would be a quick, simple performance. I was wrong. Completely wrong. You silenced this entire hall. And not because you were loud or flashy, but because you were honest. People can feel honesty in music. You have it." Amara lowered her eyes for a moment, humbled by their words. She wasn't used to praise like this. Every compliment felt like sunlight, warming her from the inside out. The audience clapped again, not as loudly as before, but with the same energy, as if they were agreeing with every word the judges had said. From her seat in the crowd, Lila, the friend Amara had originally come to support, was grinning from ear to ear. She clapped so hard her hands stung. She had always known her friend could sing, but she had never seen her do it like this. Even Kevin, who had been the one to push her into this moment, was still watching her closely. His teasing expression was gone, replaced with something that almost looked like respect. Amara caught his gaze for a brief moment, but then she looked away. She didn't need his approval anymore, though she could tell he understood now that she was more than what he had thought. The host of the show stepped onto the stage, his voice cheerful. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all agree we just witnessed something special tonight," he said, gesturing toward Amara. The crowd cheered again, and Amara gave a small nod of thanks. She stepped back from the microphone, still feeling the weight of what had just happened. As she walked toward the side of the stage, she passed the stage crew, who gave her smiles and quiet words of praise. Backstage, the noise of the audience faded slightly, but the warmth stayed in her chest. She leaned against the wall for a moment, letting herself breathe. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear now, but from the rush of realizing she had done it. She had faced the moment and turned it into something beautiful. Lila rushed in from the side, throwing her arms around her. "You were amazing," she whispered, almost out of breath. "I told you, you have the voice to do this. You silenced the whole room, Amara." Amara laughed softly, the sound light and relieved. I still can't believe I just did that, she admitted. You didn't just do it, Lila said firmly. You owned it. From the other side of the room, Kevin appeared. He didn't come too close, but he gave a short nod. That was really good, he said quietly. There was no trace of mockery in his voice. Amara simply nodded back. Thanks. He hesitated for a moment before walking away, and Amara realized something important. Whether he meant it as an apology or not, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had sung for herself, not for him, and not for anyone who doubted her. The rest of the show continued, but people in the audience were still talking about her performance. Some were replaying videos they had recorded. Others were describing the feeling her voice had given them. The ripple of that moment was still moving through the crowd. As Amara sat quietly backstage, waiting for the night to end, she thought about how different things could have been if she had let fear win. She thought about how she almost said no, how she almost let the whispers and teasing stop her from stepping into the light. But she hadn't. She had walked out there, opened her mouth, and let her song speak for her. And now she knew something she hadn't fully understood before. Sometimes the moments that feel like traps are actually doors. You just have to be brave enough to walk through them. The applause slowly faded, but the warmth it left behind still filled the hall. Amara stood near the edge of the stage, unsure if she should step down or wait. The judges exchanged a few quiet words among themselves, their expressions thoughtful. The man with glasses cleared his throat and leaned toward his microphone. Before we move on to the next act, he said, I think we need to acknowledge something important. What happened here tonight was more than just a performance. It was a reminder that real talent can come from anywhere, at any moment, when we least expect it. The audience clapped softly, agreeing. He looked directly at Amara. Your voice, he continued, has a rare honesty. You don't just sing notes. You tell a story. That's something many professionals try to learn. For years and still cannot master, and you did it naturally. Amara felt her cheeks warm. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded, her hands lightly clasped in front of her. The second judge, the woman with short hair, leaned closer to her microphone. When you came out here, I didn't think you were ready. You looked nervous. But the moment you began, that feeling disappeared. You made the entire hall stop and listen. That is what true stage presence looks like. And if this is what you can do now, without preparation, I can only imagine what you could do with training and experience. The audience murmured again, many turning to one another with approving nods. Then the young man in the suit spoke. His tone was warm but serious. I want to tell you something important, Amara, he said. Opportunities like this don't come often. You've shown tonight that you have something special, something worth sharing with the world. If you ever choose to pursue singing, I believe you could go far. And I'm not just saying that as a judge. I'm saying it as someone who loves music and knows what it means to be moved by it. Amara's heart pounded. She had never imagined hearing such words, especially not from people who judged talent for a living. She felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted, and she was standing on a new path she hadn't known existed. The host stepped forward again. Amara, I think I speak for everyone here when I say, we hope this isn't the last time we hear you sing. The audience clapped once more, and this time Amara allowed herself to smile more openly. She stepped closer to the microphone and spoke for the first time since the song had ended. Her voice was soft, but steady. Thank you. I didn't plan to sing tonight, but I'm glad I did. Her words were simple, but they were met with another warm wave of applause. She stepped off the stage, and as she did, the second judge called after her, Don't hide that voice again. The tone was friendly but firm, as if it were both, a compliment and an instruction. Backstage, Lila was waiting with wide eyes and a grin. Do you hear what they just said to you? You could actually do this, Amara, not just tonight, but for real. Amara laughed softly, shaking her head. I don't even know where I'd start. You already started, Lila said with a playful push on her shoulder. You started the moment you said yes. Amara's smile lingered, but inside she was still trying to understand the weight of what had happened. The judges' voices replayed in her head, rare honesty, true stage presence, something special. She wasn't sure if she believed all of it yet, but she couldn't deny that something had changed inside her. While the rest of the show went on, several people backstage came over to speak with her. A man from the organizing team asked if she would be interested in joining next year's competition as an official contestant. A local music teacher handed her a business card, saying she would be happy to help her develop her voice further. Even a few of the other performers came forward to say she had inspired them. Amara accepted each kind word with gratitude, though it all felt a little unreal. Only an hour ago, she had been in the background, quietly supporting her friend. Now she was in the center of attention, her name whispered from row to row in the audience. Later that night, when the final act finished and the winners were announced, Amara's name was not called, because she hadn't even been a registered contestant. But it didn't matter. The loudest cheer of the night had been for her performance, and everyone knew it. When she finally stepped outside into the cool night air, she felt lighter. The sky above Glenwood was full of stars, each one shining quietly in the darkness. Lila joined her, wrapping a scarf around her neck. So, she said, how does it feel to know you silenced the judges? Amara laughed softly. It feels strange, and good, and a little scary. Scary? Lila asked, raising an eyebrow. Because now I can't pretend I'm just a girl who sings in her room, Amara replied. Now I know I can do more, and that means I have to decide if I will. They walked together down the street toward home, the echoes of the night still fresh in Amara's mind. She thought about the people who had clapped, the judges who had spoken so sincerely, and the way her voice had filled the hall. Somewhere inside, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was only the first page. The days after that special evening passed quietly but beautifully in Ethan's house. The once cold and silent rooms now held the warmth of gentle laughter and soft conversations. Every corner of the home seemed to carry a little more life than before. Ethan noticed it every morning when he woke up and every night before going to bed. Grace's presence had become natural, like she had always been part of their lives. She moved through the house with calm confidence, caring for Lily, with patience and love. There was no rush in her actions, no hint that this was simply a job for her. She treated Lily like her own, and Ethan could see the deep bond forming between them. One morning, the golden light of sunrise filled the kitchen as Grace stood by the counter preparing breakfast. Lily sat in her high chair, giggling at the way. Grace pretended to make the spoon dance before feeding her. Ethan leaned quietly against the doorway, watching the scene. For a man who had once lived in a world of strict schedules and endless meetings, these small moments had become his favorite. Part of the day, the warmth he felt in his chest was new, and he found himself wanting to be home more often. After breakfast, they decided to take Lily to the park. The autumn air was crisp and leaves crunched under their feet. Grace pushed the stroller slowly, pointing out squirrels running up the trees and the different colors of leaves. Lily clapped her tiny hands in excitement each time she spotted something new. Ethan walked beside them, listening to Grace's soft voice as she described the world to Lily. He realized how different life felt now. He was no longer moving through days as if they were only tasks to complete. Each moment felt meaningful. That evening, when Lily was asleep, Ethan asked Grace to join him in the living room. "There's something I've been thinking about," he began. His voice was calm but serious. Grace looked at him curiously and sat down. "You came into this house in an unusual way," Ethan continued. "I didn't know what to think at first. But over time, I've seen the kind of person you are. You care for Lily in a way I could never have asked for. You've brought warmth to her life, and to mine as well. I want to make sure you know you're not just here for a short time. I'd like you to stay as her full-time nanny, officially." Grace's eyes softened. "Are you sure, Ethan? I don't want you to feel you owe me anything." "It's not about owing," Ethan said firmly. "It's about trust, and about knowing what's best for Lily. I trust you more than anyone." Grace smiled gently. "Then I'll stay. Thank you for trusting me." From that day forward, life found a steady rhythm. Mornings were filled with the smell of breakfast and the sound of Lily's happy babbling. Afternoons were for walks in the garden or quiet reading time in the living room. Evenings ended with Grace reading bedtime stories to Lily, while Ethan sometimes stood quietly at the door, listening with a smile. They began sharing more small moments together. Sometimes Ethan would help Grace in the kitchen, learning simple recipes she liked to make. Other times, they would all sit in the garden, watching the sunset as Lily played with her toys. The house no longer felt like a place Ethan simply returned to at night. It felt like home. One snowy afternoon, as winter arrived, Grace and Ethan helped Lily make her first paper snowflakes. Grace guided her little hands with care, and Ethan laughed when Lily tried to taste the paper. They hung the snowflakes in the living room windows, and Lily pointed to them proudly each time she passed by. On weekends, they sometimes visited a small cafe nearby. Grace would sit with Lily at the table while Ethan ordered hot chocolate for everyone. The simple outings felt more valuable than any expensive trip Ethan had taken before. Then came Lily's first birthday. Ethan wanted it to be special but simple, surrounded only by close friends and a few neighbors. Grace decorated the house with balloons and colorful ribbons, making sure everything felt warm and cheerful. When the cake arrived, Grace placed Lily in her high chair and helped her blow out the single candle. Everyone clapped, and Lily's laughter filled the room. Ethan watched her, feeling a deep happiness he couldn't fully explain. As the guests left and the evening quieted down, Ethan found Grace in the kitchen, cleaning up. "You've done so much for us," he said softly. Grace turned to him. "And you've given me something I never expected, a place to belong." They stood there for a moment, no words needed, both understanding that something had changed in their lives forever. Months passed, and the bond between the three of them grew stronger. Grace was no longer seen as just a nanny. She was family. Ethan knew it, and so did Lily. Every night before bed, Lily would reach out her tiny hands for Grace, wanting one last hug before sleeping. And every morning, the first sound in the house was Lily's happy voice calling for her. Ethan realized that the most unexpected part of this whole journey wasn't how Grace had entered their lives. It was how she had stayed, turning their days into something richer and kinder than before. And so, what began as a single surprising moment in the nursery had become the foundation of a new life, one built on trust, care, and the quiet kind of love that doesn't need to be spoken to, be understood.